welcome back on this Sunday morning at 7:35. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Angela and Martin.
And we're going to take a look now at today's front pages, because we start with The Observer, where they lead with Johnson threatens Sunak's bid to end the deadlock over Brexit.
Boris is back like an Olympic. The Independent's front page, the sick children left to suffer as wait for care on NHS soars.
Now, The Sun on Sunday goes with Andrew evicted from £30 million mansion.
And you can hear the world's smallest violins in the background as the Daily Star reports on the rise of alien-related work absences.
Oh, yes. Time to go through the papers now, though. Joining us this morning, we have two people. We've got Candice Holdworth, who's a writer and commentator, and da-da-da-da, he's arrived.
Hello.
And it is Fraser Myers, who is the deputy editor of Spite. We should explain, I'm sorry, because the viewers and listeners who were not with us earlier, you overslept this morning, didn't you?
Wrong kind of snow, wrong leaves on the track.
Yeah,
all of that, yeah.
Maybe aliens beamed you up momentarily. Well, they've beamed you in now. Let's beam you straight in, Fraser. My favourite subject, a little bit of Brexit.
Yes. So this is the story, the least surprising story of the year, that Rishi Sunak is preparing to betray Brexit. He is going to do a deal with the European Union. I mean, it's not fully all been signed off. The T's and I's yet to be crossed. But he's going to allow a role for the European Court of Justice.
Well, it's what he wants.
Well, that's the doomsday scenario,
yes.
You might say. We don't know the detail, but that is what Brexit is, or certainly
That's what everyone suspects. It's what the EU, actually, Maros Sefcovic, who's in charge of, on the EU side of these negotiations, has been boasting that the ECJ is going to play a role. So all the signs, all the noises are pointing in that direction. And, you know, that's really significant. We voted as a United Kingdom to leave the European Union, and a part of our country is going to be under the jurisdiction of a foreign court. That is a major problem. Now, Sunak will defend himself by saying we're dealing with the practical issues created by the Northern Ireland Protocol. Previously, you know, pretty much every good crossing from Great Britain into Northern Ireland was being checked. In fact, this has become a pretty sore point, because the EU were really, you know, going overboard. Pretty much, I think it was around one point, around 2/3 of all of the EU's custom checks of all goods coming from the entire world into the EU were happening in between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Yeah. So clearly this issue did have to be resolved. Sunak is going to play up the practicalities of that, but really we've got to hold his feet to the fire on the principle. You know, we should not have the European Court of Justice playing a role in domestic British life.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree. Candice, your thoughts on this matter? Is the last thing or the best thing we need now a return of Bozza?
I think for Rishi Sunak, it must just be such a headache. He's just sort of ignoring him and hoping that he can just get positive headlines for what he sees as finding a resolution to this. Because I think Rishi Sunak is a bit more of he sees himself as a pragmatist, and he's finding a deal. But there are those within the Conservative Party who really do see this as a betrayal. And Boris Johnson, who is very good at picking up on these things, may try to use it.
Well, we had a lot of GB views on this, and so just to interact there for a moment, Peter from Harold Wood says Boris is still the most powerful politician in the United Kingdom, and hopefully he does come back as leader of the Conservative Party again, because things get done when he's in charge. The trouble is, the thing that he did with the Northern Ireland Protocol as it stands at the moment is having a disastrous effect on the commerce of Northern Ireland, and it's the viewers in Northern Ireland watching us at the moment now who will say it ain't working for us.
Well, he would say, not to defend him too much, he and Lord Frost, who, you know, negotiated the deal, they would say that they inherited a lot of these problems from Theresa May and Ollie Robbins, and, you know, that period when we weren't really negotiating for a Brexit. The withdrawal agreement that was agreed on had all kinds of problems, and then the deal that Boris did is actually leaves us a lot, I don't know, gives us a lot more freedom from the EU than actually many of us would have expected.
But Theresa May made a statement in Parliament saying exactly the opposite, saying that no British Prime Minister should ever agree to a border down the Irish Sea.
But what she ended up agreeing to was the backstop. People might remember that from years ago, which essentially said that if we don't reach a deal on Northern Ireland, then the whole of the UK should remain in the European the EU customs union. So these are two terrible situations. Granted,
the backstop was Theresa May's downfall. It was the downfall of her party in many senses. Let the Brexit party in. It got me involved in politics. It would have betrayed the United Kingdom. As you can tell, I can talk about Brexit all day. Shall we move on?
Not letting you. No. Candice, Jihadi Jack's mum has written a book, according to the Sunday Times.
What?
Yes. So this caught my eye. So this is a story in the Sunday Times. The mother of Jihadi Jack, the lesser-known ISIS person who left to join ISIS and had his citizenship stripped. She's written a book called Reasonable Cause to Suspect, where apparently she examines her own role in her son becoming radicalised. And she's blamed her liberal parenting, but some of the things she described, I don't know if I would describe them as liberal, I would describe them as maybe irresponsible. So she had apparently drug addicts living in the house with them when he was a child, who would rob the house and have all sorts of strange people coming and going. She also thinks that he was very isolated from his family, which is why he was drawn to ISIS. I must say, I really like hearing from the parents of people who do extreme things, because I think often we can examine these things from a macro perspective and look at all the cultural and social forces, but sometimes the key to understanding someone's behaviour can be from the home, things that they were exposed to when they were younger. And I thought this with things like Oscar Pistorius, the Columbine killers, when one of their mothers came out and was talking about what went on in their household. So yeah, just very interesting for me as well as a parent.
It depends on how honest they are being, actually, about their own role in their child's upbringing.
Fraser, I can hear you gnashing your teeth in the background. It's liberalism that's to blame, nothing at all to do with perhaps his faith or his political leanings.
Yeah, I do find this a bit of a bizarre mea culpa. I don't think liberal parenting is that bad. Can I defend liberal parenting on GBNEWS? I don't think it's what's turning people into ISIS killers. No. Certainly. I mean, this is what's strange, isn't it? I mean, ISIS is such an obvious sort of neo-fascistic. If you were going to put it on the left-right spectrum, you put it really, really far to the right, given it's ultra-conservative, ultra-racist, it's Islamic supremacist. So it's about a million, it's far away from this sort of lovey-dovey liberal parenting as you can get. He's going there throwing gays off buildings and things like that. I
always thought liberal parents led to sort of an obsession with, like, Greta Thunberg.
That's what I would have thought.
Not Islamist terrorism.
It sounds like her ideals haven't been imparted on him whatsoever, more than anything.
OK, a story that certainly caught my eye in the front of the Sunday Telegraph. My old mucker from Ashfield, I stood against him in the 2019 election, never short of a word or two. New Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party. Lee Anderson's been putting the cat amongst the pigeons again. What's he done this time?
He is a sort of one-man headline-generating machine, isn't he, Lee Anderson, the Deputy Chairman of the Tory Party. He's now saying that refugee charities are as bad as people smugglers. Now, his rationale for that is that it's part of a kind of, I don't know whether you want to call it industry or network of infrastructure around Calais. He says they're encouraging people to make the journey. I don't know if that's fair. I think some of the work that people like Care for Calais do is legitimate. These people need help. They're not allowed to work, so they need clothing, shelter, etc., etc. And they might need legal representation. Everyone deserves that, whether they are here legally, illegally, whatever. That's just a basic kind of human right. But where I think he does have a point is that some of these charities, in the way that they influence, essentially are, in a sense, they're dictating government policy. I think that is kind of the issue. So I don't even agree with the Rwanda scheme, but I think it's a problem that the elected government can't get it off the ground because of the interference of lawyers, because of the interference of charities and NGOs. Then you have to ask who actually runs this country if we can't even have an immigration policy. It's interesting, I was looking at some of the figures around deportations. Deportations, even for criminals, have gone down by 63% since 2019, since the pandemic. And I think that's got to be a result, something that's got to be something to do with the growth of these kinds of charities and their influence.
I wonder, Candice, are people like Lee Anderson useful? They're flying these kites of the more, you might say, the more extreme end of the idea spectrum, but they do appeal, don't they, to a certain part of the electorate, or is he kind of an accident waiting to happen?
I think, from what I've read, he's actually responsible for a small bump in the Conservative Party's
5% in 1 week.
Yes, he sort of broaches subjects that maybe other Conservatives are a bit scared to broach, but he knows are popular with the electorate, and this is a very popular topic with the electorate. And I think the criticism he has, and I so agree with Fraser on this, is that, yes, fine, these charities do many legitimate things, but they're also very far to the left of most of the British population, and they have their own agenda, and what they do isn't shared, or the ideas they have aren't shared by the general British public. So I think it's good to give them some scrutiny.
But it's an indication of the way in which the country as a whole is divided on this issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Candice, you've been looking at Me Too in schools. Is this a story in the Sunday Times? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I find this fascinating. So this was in the Sunday Times. It was an anonymous story by a mother of a son who'd been accused of very serious sexual assault. He's a teenage boy. It was at his school. He's about 14 years old. Apparently, he put his hand on a girl's leg, which he thought was a completely consensual encounter. Later on, a third party reported him for sexual assault. It was referred to the police and the social services, the Children's Protection Services, who said that they thought the school's response was disproportionate. And this boy's been left with apparently a lot of social anxiety, doesn't want to interact with other girls because he was branded a rapist and all kinds of horrible things. And this can be such a difficult subject to broach, but I'm glad the Sunday Times is broaching it, because I think that as adults, what we may be doing by overcorrecting for things that had to do with Me Too, we may be interfering with the healthy, normal social development of young teenage boys and young teenage girls who will touch each other, who will hang off each other a bit, and we don't want to pathologize normal social interactions between teenagers. So yeah, as a mother of two young boys, this is something that interests me a lot.
Well, amen to that, Fraser. That's wonderful to hear that. Thank you. Don't you think this is part of the ongoing, not just demonisation of boys, but of all young people? My boy is 13. He's terrified of being called a transphobe, of being called a racist. All these labels that are applied, and there's a huge amount of pressure on kids who, let's face it, they're teenagers. They make mistakes.
You need to be free to make mistakes. You need to be free to, discover people's boundaries and things like that. That's the age at which you should be allowed to do that. Unfortunately, there are people will do something wrong, and then they'll be hounded on Twitter or TikTok, or there's this website which is mentioned in this article called Everyone's Invited, which is basically naming and shaming children for, they say sexual assault, but it could be anything. You don't know what people are being accused of and whether it's true or not. And instead of adults, instead of trying to say, calm down, everyone, they're doing the opposite. They're saying, yes, actually, we do have a problem with sexual assault in schools. The school, after this incident happened, they were all given a consent class in assembly, which actually just fueled the rumours, because when this boy was suspended and suddenly we're having, being educated about consent and about rape, obviously that just that makes people think, yes, this is what has happened, and it just spirals out of control. So adults really need to be careful about this.
It's so tough for young kids now to know where the dividing line is. They find themselves between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, we've got saying, we've got to have more hugs and you've got to be more tactile with people. But on the other hand, what is tactile and what is sexual? And how does a 12 or a 13 or a 14-year-old make that distinction? I don't know.
Well, it's an incredibly difficult world they're growing up in, and sometimes it's hard not to believe that our children are just part of some big social experiment, and they're all confused, they don't know what to do. And I fear, as you say, Candice, a lot of young boys in particular are going to start retreating into their shells, believing that the labels stick on them, and I think it's a terrible state of affairs. It's been a very, very thought-provoking paper review. Thank you, Fraser and Candice. It's been tremendous.
Thanks.